Good morning, friends. It's Saturday. We made it through another work week, and I'm back with Chapter 2 of my upcoming book, Campaign at Fort Stix. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the mists of time with a story I call Arrival at Fort Stix. I awoke with the sunrise to the familiar smells of coffee and cigarettes. As unlikely as it seemed, obviously, one of my parents was awake before me on a Saturday morning. Either that, or they had just recently gone to bed, which, in my experience, was probably closer to the truth, as my folks were creatures of the night. Jumping up from the bed, I snatched up my favorite jeans and began to put them on as I retrieved my shoes from the opposite corners of the room where I had kicked them off the night before. Within moments, I was dressed, ready for the day, and headed out to see who was already moving about the house. As I suspected, my father was sitting at the kitchen table looking down at a notepad, in one hand a cigarette, and the other his empty coffee cup. On the paper was a rough sketch of the farm, and he had made little notes all over the page about things he had intended to do there. He raised his cup to take a drink, and finding it empty, cast a glance toward the pot on the counter. It was empty, too. "Hey, can you make me another pot of coffee?" he asked, setting his cup down to make notes on the page. "Sure, Dad," I said, and went to the counter. Filling the pot with cold water, I thought to myself that there must be a conspiracy afoot. Whenever I got up and found my dad already awake, I ended up making coffee. It was as if he just sat there with an empty cup and pot, waiting for me to get up and make some more. Once the water was added to the pot, I cleaned out the coffee filter and added the proper amount of grounds and turned it on. The sounds of gurgling indicated it was working. I cast a glance to the clock on the stove and realized I needed to get moving or I would miss the beginning of my cartoons. That was, after all, the only reason I had for getting up so early on a day when I did not have to go to school. With the coffee brewing, I grabbed the box of my favorite cereal from the cabinet and filled a bowl almost to the top. When I added milk, the lighter oat bits floated over the rim to spill on the counter, but not a single marshmallow shape escaped. I scooped up the bits from the counter and popped them in my mouth as I reached for the sugar bowl. "You know that cereal is already sweetened, right?" my dad asked as he got up to get a cup of coffee. "Only the marshmallows," I replied, and sprinkled a generous amount of sugar over the bowl. He was still shaking his head as I went to the living room and set my bowl on the coffee table. I turned on the television and glanced at the clock as I waited for it to warm up and come on. After what seemed an eternity, I heard the familiar crackling of static electricity and smelled the dust burning off the tubes as the TV came to life and the screen lit up. I quickly rotated the dial to find my channel and was pleased to see the opening credits of my cartoons. I had not missed anything. Sitting cross-legged at the coffee table sometime after my bowl was empty but before my cartoons were over, I became aware of the annoying sounds of my family moving about the house. During a commercial, I looked over at the chair where my brother liked to sit, and it was empty, which I found odd since there were cartoons on the television. His empty bowl was next to mine at the end of the coffee table, but he was nowhere in sight. I pondered this mystery deeply until the commercials ended and the next cartoon started. "Dad said if you don't go get in the truck now, he's going to leave you here and go to the farm without you," Mark said as he came running into the room. I was engrossed in deep thought about the scientific aspects of the latest cartoon, and it took a moment for what he said to register in my mind. I ignored him and continued to contemplate how simply painting a tunnel on the side of a mountain would actually make such a tunnel appear and be useful. I was also curious how a train could just appear at the other end of the tunnel and come right on through when there were no railroad tracks on this side of it. "Dad said," Mark began, raising his voice to the irritating pitch that ate into my brain like a drill. "I heard you the first time," I snapped, and jumped to my feet to turn the television off. Obviously, Mark thought I was getting up to come after him as he bolted from the room, yelling for Mom. I casually turned the television off and headed out the front door to the truck. By the time Mark and Mom got outside, I was in my seat, waiting to leave. As the sun floated above the trees on the horizon, I found myself once again in the middle of the truck seat, headed for yet another home. It was not unusual for my parents to move around, as my father was born restless and could not stand one place too long before he had to go see what was happening somewhere else. So, I began to look forward to these moves, ingraining the restless spirit and yearning for adventure. But this time was supposed to be different. We were going to the family farm, which had been built in 1842 and handed down through generations. It was intended to be the place where I would grow up and go to high school, with no more moving around. This itself was a foreign concept. We rolled off the pavement onto a bumpy dirt road which wound back into the woods, toward a small ranch house I could see intermittently through the trees. It was actually quite nice, I realized as we rolled on past it, around the bend, and onto a small hill where our house sat. I had never seen a haunted house before, but I was absolutely certain this was one. As we pulled up beside it, I noticed the back porch faced the woods at the back of the house, and the front door simply had a concrete step and landing. "The house we passed by is where your great aunt lives," my father said, "and down the hill behind this house is your grandpa's house." Thinking about this, I thought it might be kind of neat to live so close to my grandfather. I jumped out of the truck as visions of ghost chasing and hunting wild mythical creatures in the dark woods filled my head and assessed my new playground. This could be a fine adventure indeed. Then suddenly, I realized two critical things. There sure were a lot of honeybees hovering around one worn corner of the old garage, and I had to use the bathroom. "Dad," I said urgently, "where's the bathroom?" "Right there," he said, and pointed to a small shack in the field out past the garage. I thought maybe he was kidding at first, but opening the door, I got my first look at a real outhouse. I had used the plastic porta-johns at the carnival and parks, but those were chemical toilets that could be rolled around easily. This outhouse was a small wood building in a field. Inside there was a stack of papers laying on the bench beside the hole in the top. A toilet seat had been crudely nailed to the top over the hole, but I guess they didn't want to have to lift the lid because it was missing. I peered down into the hole and could see small beams of light shining in below from nail or knot holes in the wood. I will not describe what I saw down there in the dim glow, but I can say that I learned the paper on the bench was meant to be used as toilet paper. As I quietly sat there looking out at the pale blue sky through the crescent-shaped opening in the door, it occurred to me that I was using the bathroom outside the house. This meant that there was no bathroom in the house. That meant if I had to go to the bathroom at night, I would be looking out this opening with blackness beyond it, and there was no telling what manner of creatures could be looking back at me. These scary, bone-chilling thoughts filled my entire existence for all of the next 30 seconds as I quickly left the outhouse, until I spotted a large pile of planks in the field. Inspiration flooded me as I forgot the outhouse and realized I had stumbled across the perfect opportunity to hone my skills as a carpenter. I had built several box traps for catching live rabbits in the previous fall, and even helped in making a doghouse or two. But now, I had an opportunity to build with large pieces of wood. Looking at the garage, something in my mind said there was a hammer and nails there, waiting for me to do what needed to be done. I ran to the garage door and found it securely locked. Not to be discouraged so easily, I saw a loose board hanging off the wall near the door and knew I had found my way in. After shooing away the bees that were hanging around, I pried the loose board off. It made a satisfying squeak sound as the last nail tried to do its job, but in the end, finally pulled free. After checking to see if anyone had heard or noticed, I slipped on in through the opening. As I entered the decrepit old structure, the wall creaked eerily when I leaned against a stud. The gloomy interior was as to be expected. Long, silvery cobwebs hung in low arcs across shafts of light streaming in where loose roof boards opened to the world outside. The bright, safe world, where no ghosts or mythical creatures were hiding in the shadows, waiting for some unlucky soul to pass too close. Adrenaline began to surge, and I could feel my muscles starting to twist up tight like rubber bands, ready to spring into action and carry me outside to the safety of the light at the first hint of danger. As my racing mind conjured various creatures from the deep darkness, I searched each shadow carefully until I saw it. There, under the workbench, lying at the edge of the light, it had a large, round head with a flat, smooth face and two long horns. The body was long and smooth like a snake. All around its head, pale gray spikes pointed in every direction from the dust like sharpened bones. Right there, just like I somehow knew, was the hammer and a pile of galvanized gray nails. Stuffing my pockets full of nails, I grabbed my prize and went quickly back to the opening by the door. The wall creaked eerily again as I braced myself and slipped one leg through the opening, but it could not compete with the loud pounding of my heart. I cast a final glance around to make sure nothing was pursuing me to prevent my escape to the light and stepped out backwards. I kept my eyes focused on the shadows as I eased through the wall so I could see if anything attempted to rush out. A rogue nail grabbed the cuff of my jeans when I pulled the second leg through the opening, just as a wild noise erupted, and I knew something was attacking me from the darkness within. "What you doing in there?" Mark asked behind me. Jerking my leg free, I spun fast to face my attacker, hammer held high at the ready. The expression on my face must have been a terrible sight to see, because my brother shrieked and ran toward the house screaming for Mom, leaving me there panting to catch my breath. Safely out in the light once again and out of danger, I breathed a long sigh of relief and replaced the loose board back over the hole in the wall. No sense inviting ghosts and mythical creatures to come out into the bright world. Just to be sure, I pounded the nails sticking out of the board back into the wall to secure it. It took a few tries as the nails were bent, but I could not waste any of the nails I had found for this. As if to signal their approval, the bees returned and brought more friends with them. Humming around my head, they buzzed loudly as I calmly waved my arms wildly about to shoo them away. Brimming with anticipation, I rushed out to the field and the pile of lumber. I quickly surveyed the area, looking at the structures around me. For several long minutes, I did numerous calculations involving escape trajectories and evaluated potential acceleration limiting factors such as trees, sand, bushes, and discarded rusty car parts. It would not do to have my travel interrupted by running into any rogue obstacles, especially those which could capitalize on an opportunity to induce pain or bleeding. Finally, I determined the best location for my new fort. It was by sheer coincidence that the perfect building spot was right there next to that pile of old lumber, which I found convenient. I also considered myself lucky that no valuable construction time would be wasted carrying the materials to a new location. I looked at the other buildings around me again and noticed they were built much like the barrels I had seen on television. Planks stood up and held together with a band of wood at the top and bottom. I could do that. Now I had a plan to go along with my newly acquired hammer. Sorting through the lumber pile, I made separate piles according to the length of the planks. Luckily, most of them were the same length, but there were a few odd boards of shorter lengths. I set these aside for future use. It was time to build. I chose 4 pairs of planks that were the same length as each other and laid them aside. These would be the top and bottom bands of my walls. I took 1 pair of band planks and laid them far enough apart to be the top and bottom of a wall, and proceeded to place the vertical planks across them. In a flurry of nails and dust, I soon had the first wall built and ready to stand. I stood it up in order to test the height and was immediately pleased. It was just a little taller than me, confirming it was the perfect height. Now confident in my progress, I continued to assemble the other 3 walls and soon had them all built. Having watched houses being built, I knew there were supposed to be other people there helping me to erect the walls, but looking around, I found no one. Obviously, no one had told anyone else that a building project was to be commenced. Even my little brother was nowhere to be seen, but this did not surprise me. He usually chose to show up just after I was done doing whatever. Secretly, I think maybe he always watched me safely from hiding so he'd know when I was done and could enjoy the fruits of my labors without having to help with the work. I stood the first wall up and braced it diagonally with a plank. Then, standing another against it, I nailed them together at the edge, forming a corner. In no time at all, I had the walls up and stood back to admire my work. It was at this time that my little brother found his way to the field, and, as all 4-year younger siblings will always do, he went about inspecting the work. "Where's the door?" he asked after walking all the way around my new fort. "I haven't made it yet," I said sharply, annoyed at his noticing a flaw in my plan. "How come?" "'Cause I want to make sure I put it in the perfect place, and I could not tell where that would be until I had a chance to look it over." I pried a couple planks off with the hammer and went inside. "Where's the roof?" he asked, following me inside. "Man, do I gotta explain everything?" I looked up as if studying the walls where the roof would be. "I couldn't build the roof until I built the walls and made a door." "How come?" "'Cause the walls hold the roof up," I explained. "Oh," he said half-heartedly. I went out and found an old bucket to stand on so I could reach the roof and began laying planks across the top, nailing them to the top of the walls. Before long, I had the roof completed and carried the bucket inside to sit on. Sitting in the fort with my brother, admiring the new roof and my handiwork, I was quite pleased with myself. I had built my first real fort all by myself, and there were no shafts of sunlight streaking down from the roof like they did in the garage. Nor were there any dark shadows where monsters could hide. "Why is that corner so small?" he asked, pointing. I had not realized my 4 walls were not the same length, and thus created a trapezoidal effect inside. "That's so we have a place to stash our valuables," I explained. "It's a dark corner for hiding things." "Oh," he said half-heartedly. I grabbed a small piece of wood and began writing on it with a black crayon that I kept in my pocket for just such an occasion. Carefully, I made large block letters and colored them in so it was real easy to read. Then I carried it outside and he dutifully handed me the hammer and nails as I hung it over the door. Stepping back to inspect, I had to admit my first fort was perfect. I christened it Fort Stix. I hope you enjoyed this look into the campaign at Fort Stix. That's all for now, but I'll be back again next week with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.